Join us at Glossy's Beauty and Wellness Summit from November 11th through 13th in Napa, California. Influential beauty and wellness leaders will meet to discuss strategies and pain points, discover innovative tech, and ultimately make valuable business connections through one-on-ones and casual networking. For a limited time, we're offering $200 off with promo code GBS24, no spaces. Again, that's GBS24 with no spaces. Go to glossy.co/beauty summit for more information and to secure your pass today.
Hello and welcome back to the Glossy Week in Review podcast. I'm your host, senior fashion reporter Danny Parisi, and I'm here with our international reporter Zofia Zwieglinska. How are you, Zofia?
Yeah, good, thank you. Great to be on again.
Yeah, thanks for being here. We are going to be talking about Paris Fashion Week, which just wrapped up. Jill and I talked about the first couple of shows last week, but we will be recapping more today. And then we're also going to talk about Hedi Slimane leaving Celine, which was announced yesterday. Before we're recording this Thursday, so 2 days ago from when you're listening. And then finally, we're going to talk about LVMH's continued quest for world domination by partnering with Formula One, which is a huge, like $100 million a year or 100 million euro deal. Let's start at the end with the Coperni show, which wrapped up the week, which was at Disneyland in Paris. The first time a designer has hosted a show at Disneyland. And the collection, I had originally written in my notes that it had subtle allusions to Disney, but then I was looking at the pictures and it is not subtle at all. There's like princess dresses and like black dresses that were supposed to be like the villains. And then there was like Mickey Mouse heels with big Mickey Mouse ears and Mickey Mouse t-shirts and stuff. It kind of seemed like a whole just Disney like kind of collection more than just a show held at Disney. I hope I don't anger anybody by saying this, but I find Disney obsession a little bit cringy. And I kind of like thought that this was a little goofy to me. What are your thoughts on that Coperni show?
Oh, yeah, it was definitely goofy. I think even some of the fashion people, when they were recording themselves going into Disneyland, being like, oh, this is kind of cringe. Why are we here? Although everyone seemed to be enjoying the rides afterwards. So I guess there wasn't that much complaining after the show. But yeah, it felt like with the clothes themselves, it was very much a very direct reference to Disney. You know, I don't know did you hear about the Vinted drama?
Mm-mm.
So basically, apparently someone from Coperni had gone online and looked for Disney memorabilia, clothes, t-shirts, and that kind of stuff. And they were bartering down a Disney-themed t-shirt with Mickey Mouse on it. I think it's the dark blue one if you end up going to search, from €9 to €7. And it ended up actually being featured on the runway. And people were very, very upset that, you know, a high cost production like Disneyland, there was someone who was, you know, literally getting it down by €2, trying to get that final deal price for, you know, a show that most likely was definitely up there in terms of costs.
Oh, yeah, for sure. It was very elaborate and extravagant. And like I said, Disney I don't think has ever hosted something like this before. And I wonder if it was a Disney request or a Coperni decision to have so much Disney stuff like actually on the runway. Like if that was a condition of the deal, is that it has to be like a Disney themed collection or what? In the kind of like public comments, it seems like the designers are genuine like Disney adults. But I found it a little cringy, to be honest. But I have some friends who just were at Disney World in the US for like taking their niece and nephew there or something. And they kind of had the same feeling of like, oh, like going to Disney as an adult is so like silly. And then they got there and was like, okay, to be honest, it is pretty fun. So if I was able to go to this Coperni show, I probably would have enjoyed the rides and stuff, even while rolling my eyes the whole time. At Paris in general, there was a really good essay in the New York Times from Vanessa Friedman about some of the sort of hesitation that she sensed at Paris. Some brands like Chanel are kind of between designers, so their clothes were just designed by the design team. And because of that, they were kind of safe. Like it just looked like normal Chanel, not super daring. I think she also noted that Alessandro Michele designing for Valentino looks a lot like Alessandro Michele designing for Gucci. So it's sort of just like deja vu in not a great way. Did you get that sense that there was not as much maybe daring on the runways at Paris?
Yeah, definitely. I think that it seemed like a far safer runway than usual. Obviously, there's still a couple of designers and brands that did do some more adventurous stuff, but I always feel like these are kind of not the main kind of showing brands. I would say maybe LVMH was slightly more interesting. I think the kind of like back in time traveling collections from Guesquier are always a very big hit, and it seemed like this collection was too. There was, I think, in particular, some very nice silk pieces that I think a lot of people were like, yeah, this is really interesting. But I would say that, in terms of the actual fun parts of Fashion Week so far, it's kind of the same kind of stuff as what Bottega did at Milan. You have to kind of end up going back to something that's fun. I think the only fun one that I've seen was Loewe with all of the different crafting elements that they had. I don't know if you saw, but their like whole social media is them splicing together this mother of pearl to create these jackets. And I was like, yes, like that is interesting. But in terms of the overall design direction, I think that a lot of brands played it safe this season.
Yeah, I agree. And I was trying to think of maybe some of the reasons for that. I mean, one, like we mentioned with Chanel, is some brands are between designers. And so there's not as much of a strong like creative leadership. I also think just in general, like we've talked about, luxury sales are down quite a bit and have been for a while. And I think a lot of luxury brands are maybe not super used to that. And in a tight economic time, you're not as adventurous. I feel like that's just standard. When things are tight, you play it safe. I think BOF noted in their review of Paris Fashion Week that playing it safe over the in the long run is more dangerous. Like especially in fashion, like the luxury fashion is in the business of innovation and trend setting and not just trend following. So like, I do think some of these brands need to be bold and, make big decisions and not just play it safe, but maybe for a season or two, if they're feeling, conscious of their bottom line, that's what they'll do. But I'm hoping that in future seasons, they'll have a little more confidence. So that might be part of it, is just like the kind of tough economic climate for luxury, which has just been a little bit on the decline since last year, I think.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's something that's really driving a lot of kind of brands to maybe change their creative direction and the way that they're looking at, the runway shows and what that's featuring. For a lot of these brands, especially on the luxury side, in Paris, like the runways nowadays are mostly an opportunity for those VIP clients to see items that they might want to purchase. And I think that that's something that you see again and again. At Louis Vuitton, you had the new bags that were introduced. I think that's something that maybe VIPs would be going after. And as well, for other brands, I think it's seeing those kind of more collector-like pieces and getting to, have a handle on them rather than maybe looking at something more everyday.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're totally right. And then a good transition topic would be Hedi Slimane at Celine, which showed at Paris Fashion Week, just announced yesterday, again, on Wednesday, I should say, not yesterday, but just announced on Wednesday after Celine had already shown, is that Hedi Slimane is leaving Celine. He's been there since, I think, 2018. And I remember at the time I had just started at Glossy, actually. It was a really big deal that he was taking over for Phoebe Philo, who had a very elegant, kind of understated, urbane aesthetic that people loved. And then Hedi took over, and he had a much more like edgy, like skinny jeans, like glamorous kind of style. And I remember there was a lot of concern that was such a different direction than Phoebe Philo's version of Celine. He took the accent off of the E in Celine, which for some reason I think people were like, that was the sign that he was going to like kind of trash the legacy or something. And I don't think that is what happened at all. I think he actually has done really well for Celine. He does have a different design style than Phoebe Philo, but I think it worked great for them. I think their sales like doubled over the course of his tenure. I think a lot of his collections have been really well reviewed. So even though there was fear of what he might kind of do to the brand, I don't think that materialized. He really did well for the brand, but he is now leaving. And there was only a vacuum for like, a couple of hours before they announced Michael Ryder, who's a little bit of a behind the scenes kind of guy. He's never had a big, like in the spotlight kind of role before, but he's formerly worked at Celine. Most recently has been head of women's wear for Ralph Lauren, and he's taking over Hedi Slimane's job. How about you give me your thoughts on Hedi leaving and Michael Ryder's replacement?
Yeah, so I'm not sure. And obviously, the fashion industry is awash with rumors. There was some talk about contract issues with Heidi kind of possibly affecting whether he was going to stay on at the brand. Obviously, as you said, like his tenure was remarkably successful considering the fact that, for a lot of people, I think, women, millennials are kind of slightly older, always kind of looking for the old Celine after he left. There's huge communities now where those kind of purchases are still, I guess, recognized even with the new brand from Phoebe. I think that that's something that, Celine has kind of moved away from. Now it's kind of known as a different thing. And I'm really interested to see what Michael's going to be doing, because it seems like based on all of the statements that the brand is giving out, it's very much focused on like a long-term relationship, something where they're going to have a kind of not a 3-year contract, which again, like is something that happens quite a lot with fashion. You get creative directors who are basically in and out within a couple of seasons. But it seems like, for Celine, they want someone who's going to be staying on and taking over all of the collections for a very long time. So I'm wondering if that, maybe something like that was an issue with Heidi. He stayed there for a very long time, but maybe he wasn't looking to stay on with the brand.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And on the 3-year contract note, I mean, it's been 6 years since he started, so that makes sense. But yeah, I think you're right about the old Celine communities. There's that Instagram account, I think, just called Old Celine. There's people who are still very devoted to that era. And I believe Michael Ryder worked under Phoebe Philo as a design director. So I don't know how closely they worked, but he was there during her tenure, kind of like Daniel Lee, who also worked under her and is now at Burberry and was formerly at Bottega. I think he took a lot of Phoebe's kind of design ethos with him to other brands, and that was very successful. So I'm wondering if Celine might be wanting Michael Ryder to kind of bring some of that back to Celine. Again, it's not like Hedi Slimane's era was bad for them, but I wonder if they're like, maybe we return to something a little more elegant and not as kind of out there.
It still feels quite safe. Like, I don't know about you, but for me, it's like they're kind of going back and forth between the same two aesthetics. It's like either it's edgy or it's Phoebe.
Yeah, yes. And then after Michael Ryder's there a couple of years, maybe they'll bring on some edgy new person and then the cycle will continue. No, I think you're totally right. And again, back to like what we were saying on the first topic about sort of brands wanting to play it safe right now. Like, I'm sure decisions like this are months, if not years in the making. So I don't want to say it's like reacting to any like one thing, but it is notable that right as we're talking about brands kind of playing it safe at Paris Fashion Week, another brand is like, we're dropping our kind of adventurous creative director and bringing in someone who's like a little bit of a safer bet. The other thing I wanted to say about Michael Ryder is like, we've talked about in the last year or two, a lot of luxury brands appointing people that you might uncharitably call like a stunt appointment, celebrities, or bringing in people who maybe don't have a ton of design experience. There's been some lamentation that like the traditional path of like studying design, like going to Central St. Martin's or something, and then like being a design director and then getting the creative director job, is that still viable? Or are they just going to hire like some famous person in front of you? And Michael Ryder, I think, is much more that. He has like sort of a traditional path, and like I said, he's not like a super well-known person. Like he has a great resume, but he's not like in the spotlight or like I think I saw there's like not even that many pictures of him online. So like they had to like quickly send out a headshot for people to use in the news articles and stuff. So I do think that's both a safe kind of like a safety kind of thing, but it's also a little bit refreshing to see someone still just like doing that kind of normal path from, design student, design director, creative director of a big brand. Like, it feels like good to know that that can still happen.
Yeah, definitely. And, obviously with his experience, he's coming from Ralph Lauren. So I think that, that will also possibly influence the direction that Celine will take. I'm not sure exactly which design elements he was responsible for, but you can see how much Ralph Lauren has grown, and especially, I guess, over his tenure, and what kind of design direction he's gone with. There's still some very elegant pieces. I'm wondering, if this opportunity with Celine will allow him to kind of play around with that a little bit more. Because obviously with Celine being luxury and kind of the history with Phoebe, I think it makes for a very interesting way to posit the other side or posit a mirror to all of that kind of artistic stuff that's going on with, Jonathan Anderson and Loewe.
Yep, absolutely. And then the last thing I want to say is like the speculative part, which I kind of hate doing. And I feel like the fashion industry is like, especially in the media, is a little bit too obsessed with like rumors and speculation and stuff. But I do think we should just say quickly that Hedi Slimane is leaving and Chanel currently has no top designer. Who knows? That might turn into something, or maybe not. Maybe he's going to go like start a vineyard or something. I have no idea. But it does feel like there's a conspicuous absence at the top of Chanel, and there's a conspicuously unemployed French luxury creative director who's like looking for a job. So I don't know. That could happen. Is all I'm saying.
Did you see the last collection? It all kind of had a lot of tweed.
Yeah, very Chanel-like.
Yeah.
I saw somebody describe it as like ladies at lunch kind of style, which I think Chanel does pretty well. So anyway, I don't want to dwell on it too much, but it's a possibility. Let's talk about our last topic. Announced this week, yet another huge move by LVMH, but they are now the official sponsor for Formula One. Massive deal. It's 100 million euros a year. It includes a bunch of their brands. Tag Heuer will do the timekeeping, Moet Hennessy like for drinks and celebratory champagne, Louis Vuitton for like dressing the drivers and stuff. We've talked about this a bunch, you and me, Zofia, but LVMH is like insatiable. They had the Paris Olympics. They're buying up like restaurants and hotels, and seems like they have kind of endless ambition. And Formula One, I feel like, is one they've been wanting to snag for a while, and now they've got it. I'm like, at what point does like the whole world become LVMH in a way,
Yeah, it seems like we're going back to Disney again, except this time we're doing the fashion thing. Yeah, it feels like it's a bit of a year for LVMH. Obviously, it's the biggest company in France overall, like above any other industry. So I think its omnipresence there is going to be very big. And F1 allows it to kind of take a bit more of an international stage while keeping, I guess, that luxury element there. I think F1 is still one of the only sports, maybe apart from tennis, but even that I wouldn't say has quite the same luxury cachet as, motor racing. I think, maybe sailing potentially, but I think Prada's got a bit of a monopoly on that one. So I'm wondering, if this will allow them to, invest in multiple brands at the same time, allow them to kind of showcase that while getting into more activations, VIP events. I'm going to shamelessly plug my sports and luxury piece today, where I did talk a little bit about how VIP customers are kind of looking for these sports events that are tailored specifically for them. And F1 would definitely suit that. I think it's a brilliant opportunity for LVMH to, again, kind of roll out its roster of brands, kind of similar to what it did with the Olympics, except, on a more luxury scale.
Yeah. And Formula One is huge and international, like you said. I wrote something a couple of months ago about how it has grown a lot in the US. The Netflix show Drive to Survive, I think, played a big part in that, like anecdotal, but every person I know in the US who's into Formula One got into it from that show, or at least has seen the show. So it's definitely, I think, Eurocentric, but popular all over the world. And a good fit. It's a very expensive sport. You can't like go down to the park and like do Formula One with your friends. Like it's a very luxury kind of activity. The other thing is the deal was led by Frederic Arnault, who is one of Bernard Arnault's sons and head of their watches division. And I kind of feel like Frederic has been at the heart of a lot of like the biggest LVMH moves recently. Like all of their watch stuff, which has been a big deal for them. This big thing, I feel like he's like taking a very active role. At least it feels like anytime I see like a big LVMH bit of news, like Frederic Arnault is involved. I know all of his kids are kind of involved in the business in one way or another, but it feels like Frederic Arnault is kind of taking the lead a lot. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think he's definitely kind of been playing a bigger role, and it seems like, the way that LVMH has been restructuring the kind of C-suite and its team in general over the past couple of months kind of showcases that they're trying to set it up for, a transition over to the children to take over. And I think that there's, a lot of kind of very specific moves that are tied to that. Frederic, has shown a lot of interest, I guess, in chairing his own division and also being very public about it. I think, you know, a lot of the Arnault kids kind of like to keep, I guess, to the backstage. You know, they do, you know, press events and releases and that kind of stuff. But I don't think they're quite as focused on that kind of innovation and change as Frederick is. And I think he's definitely driving that. So it's interesting to see how he's been involved in that.
Yes, absolutely. Last thing I wanted to say about Formula One is, like, we kind of talked about this, but LVMH's omnipresence is starting to feel a little dystopian to me. Seeing an ad for Louis Vuitton in the middle of the Paris Olympics, like opening ceremony, felt like invasive in a way that I didn't really like. Do you remember that? There was like the guy running around Paris and then he just like walks into a Louis Vuitton like shop where they're like making luggage or whatever. And there's like 30 seconds or a minute of like just footage of Louis Vuitton products. I was like, that feels so. And I think LVMH's whole thing is like, we are deeply entwined with France and you can't like show French culture without showing LVMH or something. But it's kind of like, imagine if the Olympics were in the US and in the middle of the opening ceremony, somebody like ate a McDonald's hamburger. Like, it would be, yeah, it's like part of the culture, but it feels weird that it's like a company also. And so that kind of feels like an ad. So anyway, my point is, I feel like it's getting to the point where you can't really like do anything or look at anything that's even remotely luxury adjacent without seeing LVMH. And I don't know, like, I don't think that's really like a risk for them at all, but for me personally, it's like a little creepy, you know?
Yeah, I end up kind of feeling like, you know, you get all of these massive companies just kind of growing and growing, but at the same time, like, you know, that with that growth at some point there's going to come a fall. And for me, this feels very like American, which is weird because like I'm like, LVMH is a French company and yet the marketing push is distinctly American. Like, you can't be doing all of these things without it kind of feeling very, you know, big, very kind of like brand focused. You know, the logos are still there, even though, you know, technically logo mania has passed. And it just feels very over the top. And I'm wondering if that's going to continue. And especially, you know, with the Olympics, the next Olympics being in LA, you know, I'm wondering if this is all a big move to kind of grow that presence to, you know, be an even bigger, you know, LVMH than it is now. And I guess a megalith of a company.
Yeah. And feels like big and almost like brute force in a way. Like, it's just, they've got so much money. They could sponsor anything, like, because who's going to like turn them away? I think that's what like feels kind of aggressive about it to me. Like, I feel a little threatened almost, but then at the same time, it's like, it's everywhere, but then it's also like exclusive. That's a little bit of a weird dichotomy. I think that's all the time we have, but this was a great conversation. Zofia, thank you as always for being here.
Thank you so much. It was so fun.
For those of you listening, don't forget to give us a rating and a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you listen to this, because that helps us out so much. And don't forget to subscribe to the Glossy podcast, because you'll hear interviews with industry insiders every Wednesday and weekend review episodes with me every Friday. Until the next time, thank you all for listening.